today's video, we're going to be learning about a model used by economists and other social scientists known as the Lorenz curve. The Lorenz curve is a simple graph which is used to show the degree of income inequality within a nation. The way the Lorenz curve shows income inequality is by graphing the amount of income earned by each quintile of a country's population. The two axes on the Lorenz curve can be labeled as follows. The vertical axis is labeled as the cumulative percentage of total income, and the horizontal axis is labeled as the cumulative percentage of the population in quintiles, which means 20% chunks. Let's go ahead and look at our graph and put labels on these two axes. It's basically a box. So what we're going to put on the vertical axis, the left side of the box, is the cumulative percentage of total income. And on the horizontal axis, we're going to put the percentage of the population. And since we want to break this into quintiles, we need to label these as follows. The total income earned by the people of a nation can be graphed from 0% to 100% in chunks of 20%. So we can put 20% of total income, 40% of total income, 60%, 80%, up to 100% of total income. On the horizontal axis, we're going to plot the percentage of the population, and then we will be able to compare how much each percentage of the population earns in terms of the total income. We'll start with the 20th percent. So the lowest 20th percent represents the poorest fifth of the population. Then you've got the next 20% up to 40%, then 60, 80, and 100. Now there are a couple of assumptions that go behind this model. One simple assumption is that the entire income of a nation is shared by the entire population of the nation. Therefore, one point that will occur on every Lorenz curve is the point up here in the upper right-hand corner where 100% of the income is earned by 100% of the population. Another assumption is that 0 people in a country earn 0% of the income. In other words, the total income earned by nobody is nothing. So a second point that will occur on every country's Lorenz curve is a point down here at the origin where 0% of the population earns 0 income. Every country's Lorenz curve, therefore, will have a line, what we call a line of equality connecting these 2 points. We can simply draw a dotted line between the 2 points I've plotted, going right up the middle of the Lorenz curve graph. So let's talk about what this dashed line represents. If this were a country's Lorenz curve, the implication would be that every quintile of the population earns an identical amount of the total income. For example, the poorest fifth, that is the population from 0 to 20%, earn exactly 20% of the income. There is a point on this Lorenz curve right here at 20 and 20. So I said the poorest fifth, but if a country's poorest people earned exactly the amount of income as the richest people, for example, the richest fifth from 80 to 100 also share 20% of the income, meaning there's another point in this Lorenz curve right here. In other words, what I'm saying is that there's no such thing as rich and poor in this country. A country in which the dashed line is the Lorenz curve would be a country in which there is total equality. That's why we actually call this line the line of total equality. Let's think for a minute. Does any country in the world have total equality? Although some countries have attempted to achieve total equality through the experiment with communism that we saw throughout the 20th century, today I think it's safe to say that no country has complete equality in income distribution. Every country today has some income inequality. In other words, every country will have a Lorenz curve that is somewhere away from the line of equality. So to determine a real country's Lorenz curve, we actually need some data. So the next thing we're going to do is find some information about how much income is earned by people in a particular country at each income level, and then plot a Lorenz curve using that information. To do that, we're going to use some tools available online, specifically the Google Public Data Explorer. On this page, we can see the income distribution for the United Kingdom going back to 1991. We're going to use the most recent data available, and using that data, we're going to plot a Lorenz curve for the United Kingdom. So here you can see that the red line represents the amount of income earned by the lowest 20% of the UK population. In 2010, the lowest 20%, the poorest 20% of the United Kingdom earned 5.77% of the total income. So going back to our Lorenz curve, if we're going to draw a Lorenz curve for the United Kingdom, the first point we can put on the Lorenz curve is at 20% of the population and 5.77% of the total income, which is right around here. One fact I know is that the poorest fifth of British households earn just 5.77% of the total income. But 1 point on a graph does not a curve make, so we need to go back and find some data for the other quintiles of the UK population. We're going to go down here and click on second 20%. Now I can see from the data that the second 20% of the UK population earned in 2010 11.38% of the income. Now let's go back to our Lorenz curve and talk about where we can plot that on the graph. You may think I want to put a point here at 40 and 11.38. However, that would be mistaken because the vertical axis is labeled cumulative percentage. What that means is that I must add that 11.38% to the 5.77% already earned by the poorest 20% of British households. That will tell me how much of the total income is earned by the poorest 40% of British households. 11.38 plus 5.77 is approximately 17% of the total income, which gives me a point right around here. So what do I know now? I know that the poorest 40% of British households earn around 17% of total income. Hence, I have the cumulative income earned by the 40% of British households at the bottom of the income ladder. Let's continue by looking at the amount of income earned by the third 20%, which will bring us up to 60% of the population. The third quintile in the UK earned in 2010 16.2% approximately of total income. I can add that to the 17% earned by the poorest 40%, and that gives me approximately 33% of total income earned by the poorest 60% of British households, which is going to put me right around here on my Lorenz curve. You can see I'm starting to get some points that are going to form a curve representing the amount of income inequality in the UK. Let's go look at the fourth 20%. Here we can see that the fourth quintile of British households alone earned around 22.6% of the total income. Adding that to the 33% earned by the lowest 60%, and we end up with about 56% of total income earned by the bottom 80% of British households. That's going to put me right around here. And now we only have one more quintile to look up information for. And as you can tell, as you can probably predict, the richest 20% of British households earn a disproportionately large share of British income, coming in at around 44%. I can add this to the 55 or 56% earned by the poorest 80%, and that brings me all the way up here back to the upper right hand corner of my graph, where 100% of the population earned 100% of the income. Now I have all the data I need to plot my Lorenz curve, and to do that all I have to do is connect these dots. I have just derived a Lorenz curve for the United Kingdom in the year 2010 using data publicly available online. What it shows me is that each quintile of the British population earns a certain percentage of the total income. And in fact, the lowest 20% earn around 5.7% of total income, while the richest 20% of British households earned about 44% of income. Now, what if I had just been given this graph without having gone and found the data myself? How could I interpret it to determine how much each quintile of the British population earns? It's really quite simple. If I want to say how much the richest fifth of British households earned, this area here represents the richest fifth. All I have to do is go up to the Lorenz curve and over to the vertical axis, sorry, and I can see that this is around 56%, meaning that the top fifth have taken 44% of total income, leaving that 56% left for the bottom 80% of the British population. So what are the takeaways I can take from this graph? First of all, the curve itself illustrates how equal the income of a country is distributed. So what would a more equal country look like compared to a less equal country? That's the next important question. Let's hypothetically say that a country had a more equal distribution of income than the UK. What would that look like on a Lorenz curve? For example, what if the richest fifth of income earners only took home 30% of income? I can illustrate that here. Now I've got the richest fifth earning up to 70, meaning that they have earned just 30% of total income. A country in which the richest fifth earned just 30% of total income would be more equal than the United Kingdom is. Let's say in the same country, the bottom fifth earn 10% of total income. That would put a point right here. A country such as this would have a Lorenz curve that was closer, not surprisingly, to the line of equality. The way I interpret this then is that a country with greater equality will have a Lorenz curve closer to the line of equality. On the other hand, what if a country had greater inequality? What if the top fifth, for example, took home 60% of total income? Let's have a quick look and see what that Lorenz curve would look like. If the richest fifth of a country's households took home 60% of income, that would leave just 40% left over for the rest of the population, meaning the Lorenz curve would look like this. The bottom 4/5 earn just 40% of the income, and let's say, for example, that the lowest fifth earn just 3% of income. That Lorenz curve would look something like this. In other words, it would be further away from the line of equality. So our interpretation, therefore, is that a country with less equality will have a Lorenz curve further away from the line of equality. The important takeaways here are that a Lorenz curve are basically just a visual representation of data that is pretty easy to find for any country. If you go back to that website I was using, you can actually choose countries from all over the world, as you can see here. I could go find out how much Estonians earn based on the quintile. You can see right away that Estonia appears to be a more equal country than the United Kingdom because the richest fifth earn less of the total income than they do in the United Kingdom. Another example would be Finland. Finland is the most equal of all three countries, at least according to how much of total income is earned by the richest fifth. Using the data for any of these countries, we can derive a Lorenz curve, and then looking at that Lorenz curve, we can draw some simple conclusions about how equal or unequal a country is. Again, to conclude, the closer a country's Lorenz curve is to the dotted line in the middle of the graph, the more equally income is distributed within that country. On the other hand, the further away a country's Lorenz curve is from the dotted line, the more unequal income is distributed within that country.